Welcome to Guy Code, a podcast dedicated to imparting dad wisdom to my son, with your host, Koji Steven Sakai, and friends.
All right. Welcome. This is Koji, and this is episode number 20. So when I was a teenager, I was definitely girl crazy, but no one ever gave me advice on how to actually talk to girls. Luckily for myself, I wasn't afraid to actually just make a fool of myself. But to help me talk about this, I brought on comedian, writer, performer, and recently politician, Kristina Wong. Hi, Kristina.
Hi, Koji.
Wait, what?
Your quarantine.
My quarantine is good. It's just
Can you hear my phone going?
Yeah, your phone just went off for a second. It's okay.
This thing, we just keep it like it's a robocall, but should we just let it keep?
Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it. It makes it seem like it's this is happening in time. It's but yeah, quarantine is going well for me. How's quarantine going for you?
Oh well, I run a sweatshop squad. Yeah, my ancestral destinies, it turns out, is to return to my ancestors' labor of garment work and make free masks for vulnerable communities. And as it turns, the whole joke is like I'm the overlord of the sweatshop because there's quite a few women of color, lots of Asian American women who are working under me. But I feel like it's the best sort of allyship work that can be done right now in terms of supporting Black communities, Indigenous communities, and just very vulnerable, poor communities without, for some of us, we're just not able to go out to rallies because we either I'm not taking care of anybody, but but I am taking care of these aunties in terms of like being their overlord. So we've been sending, masks to these different communities who are out there and vulnerable.
Oh, good. Yeah, I've been watching you on Facebook doing those. That's really great that you're doing that.
It's really interesting to get so much. People really love that we're doing this work, but it can also be really embittering. Like any moment where I feel at all like I'm being talked to, like I'm Amazon Prime, I get when people get customers or can I buy one? Can I order one? And I'm like, oh my God.
Wow. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Otherwise.
Sure. Well, I'm an unmarried woman, so I have lots of war stories about dating. If I were to do dating all over again, I just turned 42 last week, actually. I can't believe it, because I look young as a daisy. And if I could do it over again, I would just do it over again for the free food, honestly. Like, I like this like chasing down this romantic love connection, blah, 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 BS. But let's see, I grew up in San Francisco. What else could I say? I was extremely sexually repressed most of my life. That has somehow turned into a performance art career. Act out publicly on stages. And a lot of the shows that I create are about a character named Kristina Wong who sets out to save the world in some kind of overly ambitious way, and then comes Godsmacked with the reality of what that's like. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is the research I did during this show I wrote called Cat Lady, which at the time I was feeling like a cat lady because I was like completely unsuccessful in love and touring a show called Wong Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was about depression and suicide, and became really fascinated with the subculture of pickup artists, and so deeply fascinated with them that I went to their workshops, got a press badge, and went to their pickup artist convention in Hollywood, which was the weirdest fucking thing in the world. And I couldn't understand why I was so into it at first, and then it became like I realized this is a very unhealthy way for me to work out my own shit right now. A lot of weird parallels between me as a performer and these guys as sort of performers performing a set or monologue, but in bars.
Yeah.
Validation.
Those guys in the pickup community are similar to they're probably the earlier versions of what are they called when they like the Elliot what's his name, the shooter from Santa Barbara, and all those people who think that they're incels, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, like those guys. Like I do feel like that they're all really bitter and they're angry.
They have a very specific, they completely do not embrace feminism, right? But they're the weird track that I was very interested in of these pickup artists were the Asian male pickup artists. And I think you've talked to some of them, no?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Whew. Yeah, I mean, because it's weird because they will speak out against racism and stuff like that, but they have no concept of feminism and these sort of intersecting issues. And they have a very specific idea of how to both face racism, but the way, I guess, racial wins look like in the form of pussy or whatever. Like it's so weird. Like for them to like be able to pick up a white woman is somehow on the racial scoreboard makes up for colonialism or something. I don't know. Strange.
Well, why don't we get started on this advice then? Why don't you get started with your first piece of advice that I'd love to hear this.
Oh, I didn't know I was giving advice. I'm sorry.
You don't need to give advice. If you just want to talk about things that you've learned, that's fine as well.
Okay, I'll talk about a little bit more and how it comes to this. But like, so I actually did crash some of these events as a quote unquote press reporter. But the press report I was writing was for my show Cat Lady. And I guess I was really like in a rut personally in my life as an artist. I had toured this hit show all over the country, everywhere from Alaska to New York City to Oklahoma, about depression and suicide. And I just thought, oh, well, shouldn't the rest of my career just magically be handed to me? And I became super depressed because for my entire life, all I wanted was to be this kind of working artist and have people applaud me and whatever. And I just became interested in these pickup artists because the language of and the techniques they use is very similar to improv acting. So even down to the language, they call it, when you approach a group of women, it's called a set, which is what we say in stand-up, right? You have an opener, a closer, you escalate, and there are like games that you do, well, they call it the game, right? But they're like little games you play with it, and you make the idea with a good pickup is you make the woman you're picking up, because it's all women. I don't, as far as I understand, there aren't gay pickup artists, or at least a subculture teaching gay men how to pick up other men or women. But basically you make them feel like the star of the show, and you make them feel so special. And I had gotten picked up while on tour in Miami by a guy named Alex Kim. I'll just say his name. We'll just call him that because that's his name. And he was like, I had no idea it was a pickup artist. And it was the first time I went home with somebody. The first day, like the evening I met them. But I just happened to be chatting him up about pickup artists. And he said to his wingman, I didn't realize it was his wingman, he knows so-and-so and so. Oh, because I had befriended people from the TV show too, by the way. That's how deep I got into this shit. Is like back in MySpace, I was like so into these pickup artists that I became really fascinated, especially with or at least this one Asian guy, Spoon was his name on the first pickup artist reality show, and he got kicked off at the first episode. That he drove me to the airport before going to Miami, which is why he was on the tip of my tongue. And anyway, it was just it's to me was really interesting to understand pickup art, watch that show and to see men training to be pickup artists, because you'd think it is kind of scary to walk into, but what struck me more was how completely vulnerable the men were in that setting. How they're just trying to learn to be men, that they're literally in a performance art acting class, aka a pickup artist class, learning how to perform dominance, how to perform charisma. And that was just like so fascinating to me as a performer.
Yeah.
To watch them spend thousands of dollars from these Ed Hardy wearing dudes who I don't find attractive at all.
Yeah. And can I say one thing real quick? So, one of the things that's really interesting about what you're saying is that, me and my brother has a lot of issues, right? And so one of the things that, as I've talked to one of my friends who's a really well-known therapist, he talks to me about how a lot of people who have a lot of serious issues, because they don't have the feeling of like a quote, a person who understands their feelings or has like normal feelings, they live their life as if. And that's what he always said. So he's all like how would a person, if like in the last situation, like when my mom died, he was like screaming in the room, like just like screaming and like on the floor, like it's like a Korean drama or something. And it would just seem so inauthentic. And so my friend was telling me that this doctor was telling me that it's as if someone dies. This is how he thinks this is how you're supposed to act, but it just doesn't feel real. And I think a lot of these men, I mean, from my experiences with a lot of these men, they think like, oh, this is how a man is supposed to act. Or this is how they're supposed to do things. This is how they're supposed to treat women. This is how they're supposed to act when they pick up women. And then it comes off as inauthentic, right? Like my brother. And so that's what's always weird. Anyway, sorry, I wanted to interrupt. Go ahead.
I guess I struggle with that too. Not that I'm trying to be a strong man picking up women, or that I define my, well, maybe I did define my own identity as a woman around how many relationships I've been in and how romantic they've been as some sort of reflection of how loved I am. But I think, yeah, it was just really, I witnessed a pickup artist proposed to his girlfriend in front of all these pickup artists. It was the most bizarre thing. And the subculture of the girlfriends is really weird. Like, how do you sign on to this? Because to me, what feels so obvious is how sexist and racist it is. But beyond that, like, to me, that was like a given. But I was really just interested in that the real intimacy these men were finding were with each other, among these other men who were also lost.
Yeah.
And some of the pickup artists would say, you come to so many of my workshops, but I don't see you going out there and using the techniques. And there's something kind of like, and I get that as someone who went through a whole span of her life where all I did was read self-help books that would basically say the same thing over and over again, but I just wasn't moving past the self-help books to actually move on and live life, right?
Yeah.
So in this weird way, I was really fascinated with these guys as someone who was trying to figure out, well, what's next for me as an artist, and how do I take a leap? Because I also found what was interesting is that these pickup artists, their identity was not so much the identity that they sold as successful Casanovas, was so as much as being a leader among these vulnerable men, and that's what actually gave them the power. But the women were pretty much rendered invisible, really, in all this. Like, the women were just sort of an equation to create power. So, I mean, I think, like, my advice from having witnessed that was there is something kind of beautiful in that vulnerability, and that being a man is not so much about how many women you can pick up and score, but I think what I would say that as someone who was picked up by Alex Kim and did enjoy it, was how to just form real connections with people. Not so much rooted in like, oh, I can't wait to bed you, but like, but just how do you both be vulnerable and strong at the same time, but not in a way that necessarily is about sexually scoring with somebody. So, and this goes into what I think, I feel like the thing with the Asian men is because there's so many Asian men who are taking these pickup artist workshops, and I think a lot of it is literally because they have no model for how, and they tell me this too. They would tell me this. They have no model for what manhood should look like. They don't see it in the media, and they don't see it in their families, and so they're literally taking these workshops to learn from these like. So many adjectives I could use to describe these guys, these ridiculous looking guys, how to be men. But really, you don't find your manhood that way by embracing this hyper masculine idea of what a man is. I think you find your manhood by embracing feminism, embracing your vulnerability. And this does not mean to like be weak in public, but I think it's okay to be real with people. And
well, do you think it has anything to do with the stereotypes around Asian guys? Like in terms of like being like emasculated or small or, right?
Yeah, I was really interested in the Asian men in the reality show, The Pickup Artist, because I was like, a few of them were getting pretty far up. But they ended up always just sort of being like, none of them ended up making out with women. Not that that's something I would applaud or not applaud, but like, it was like, I know this is going to hit a ceiling in terms of how far they're going to be able to get in this game, because they were they were like the fun, goofy guy, like that. And that's what, in the bar settings where they had their challenges, but they couldn't, quote unquote, escalate to anything else beyond that.
Do you remember any of the games that they taught? Any of the methods?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, like meet a girl and twirl her around and high five her, and like just slowly establishing contact. Little like magic trick games you might play with like a cocktail napkin to get her number. If there are two of them that you're approaching, you would tease the one your target. Oh my God. I can't believe I'm revisiting this language. It's taken me years to expunge a lot of this because I realized it was really kind of fucking with my head. To be dating and thinking like, oh my God, this is the world I have to work around. But you would say to the target's friend, you'd be like, is she always this difficult? Is she always this hard? Like you sort of tease her by using the other one to ask questions. Yeah. And the term neg is another one. It's like, what do you got going for you besides your looks? Like you're not self out. Like, I like you. It's sort of teasing and pushing her away and making her want you more. I mean, as someone who was picked up, but the thing is, Alex Kim was very attractive. And I, in that moment, by myself in a bar in Miami, was very lonely. Like it can be a really fun experience. Like there's nothing worse than going on a date with a completely awkward person. But I do think there's a balance that is not having to date someone who took a workshop, redid his wardrobe at Hot Topic, and then a monologue on you that he's been rehearsing. But I do feel like there's a balance in between where you can still at the core be who you are, and really kind of care about a meaningful engagement with somebody.
Yeah.
Not rooted in sticking your dick in them. So I don't know. Sort of the advice I have is like, there's something to be said about embracing feminism and not hypermasculinity and being a rich and vulnerable person and not being afraid of that. Yeah.
Probably not meeting people at bars and clubs is probably
Yeah, well, that's what's interesting is like when this was happening, it was a lot of, even when I was learning about them, internet dating was all the rage. And I went on a bunch of internet dates, which were so awkward because it was like, I became so uncomfortable because I was reading about all the subculture so much that I was like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. So like the person was on the date and it was just like, and I began to like play games in my head wondering like, oh, they probably have 10 other girls they're talking to, or they're, or this is a line they use, or this is like, I just began to wonder if it was even real, if I was just in a bad play. And because it began to feel like a run of a bad play called my dating life, where I was just like every night feeling like I was telling the same story every night about myself to this new person. I don't even know who I fucking am anymore. Yeah.
Well, one of my friends was in one of those classes, and recently, before this whole thing happened, maybe like a year ago, we were talking, and because I write and produce stuff, I was waiting for somebody at a bar or restaurant, and so I pulled out my book and I started reading at the bar, and all these people were talking to me because I was reading, because nobody sees people actually read books.
Yeah.
And I was telling my friend, I was like, oh yeah, I just read at a bar and all these like women were talking to me, and so then he got a book and like the next week and tried to do it, and it didn't work. And I was like, were you actually reading? Like, were you actually like, and he was like
Trump with the Bible.
Yeah, he was just like putting it out in front of him, like, and I was like, no, you have to, like, the only reason it works is because I'm interested in my book, and I actually didn't want to talk to these people. I just wanted to read my book. I'm married. I'm not interested in meeting anybody, and because I'm not interested, and because I'm reading, like all these people were interested in talking to me, but I'm not interested in them. So, not interested, but like, I want to talk. I'm being friendly, but it's not about like, I'm not trying to pick them up. I'm just like, we're having a conversation,
I mean, I guess I would say too, to your point, like you're already married, you have a kid, like, and you're reading a book, like it's important that your life shouldn't become about fishing, right? Yes. It should just be like I think the best advice is like I got married to myself at 30, and it was very profound in front of a group of friends to do vows to myself in the mirror. This was at the Mercado, the Ethiopian restaurant in Fairfax, and and to promise to love myself forever. And I have a hard time with that, right? Like I think for a long time I would see what felt like all my friends getting married to well-off people and not having to work as hard. And I was so bitter about that. And some of them were still married to those people and some were not. And some of them are miserable marriages, right? So it's not, but at the time when I was watching online, it felt like everyone's so happy except for me. And why can't I find someone to rescue me out of this shit? Why do I date such losers? And, but now I'm like, I spent a lot of my 30s, like, well, I have no love partner to travel with, so I'm going to go take myself to Southeast Asia. And like, I was sort of late to the backpacking game and I realized this was tiring, but I did it. And it was time, because it's a little intimidating. Then I went to Africa to do volunteer work, which was like long on my list. And I made a rap album. I know that sounds really weird and white saviory, but I made this rap. This was unintentional. I say this so casually, like people do this, but like I met these guys on the street and followed them into a dark room, which was their music studio. And we ended up making this hit rap album in northern Uganda. And like these kind of moments, I feel like of me just sort of striking out on my own and just developing as a human being and not waiting for someone to show up to be my companion and stuff, I think made me a better person for when I started to date again, because I just was like less needy. I was just like, well, and I also bought my home and it was just like, I realized shit, I did this all without some doctor husband or something, and I was fine. I'm fine, I think I'm fine, but and so I think that's what it comes down to, is like, you just gotta like work on your life and working on having this experience. It's like people, if you are lucky enough to have someone in your life to travel with and have these experiences with, great. If you're waiting to meet that person so that can start, don't wait. Like just
yeah, no, that's great. Well, and I think a lot of what you're talking about, but also a lot about what these guys who are taking these classes are missing is the just being authentic to yourself. The one advice I always give my son is that, if you're going to tell jokes, you tell jokes that you think are funny yourself. And if nobody laughs, at least you're laughing at your own stuff, right? And because I think those people that take those shows or take those kind of classes, they're telling jokes that they think are supposed to get a reaction, but they themselves may or may not think it's funny. So it comes off being like a little bit like, not real. But for me, it's like, I just tell the joke that I think is funny. I'll laugh. Everyone look at me like I'm crazy, but at least like I thought it was funny. I'm genuinely laughing at my own stuff. And, like people might not appreciate my humor. They might not think it's like, they might be offended or whatever, but at least at least I thought it was funny. So I'm not pretending that.
Enjoy your own life regardless of who's sleeping next to you at night, and that's, I think, hard, because I think what was more profound to me, not the sexist, racist structure of the pickup artist subculture, but just the loneliness I was witnessing in the room. And I guess I had always been conditioned to think that men knew what they were doing, and because we as women or cis women, we read a lot of Cosmo articles about Drive Him Wild, and it's like, why does it always puts the power to the man? So it was sort of refreshing for me to see all these vulnerable men in a room who had no clue what they were doing, and to the point that they would pay this much to go to spend their weekend in a ballroom in Hollywood to learn from some idiot how to behave. And that to me made me go, oh, they don't know either.
Although that loneliness has turned into hate and anger now. And
yeah. And this is before that incel stuff all started really happening, and pickup artists were barred from showing up in different countries. So I was sort of before my time, but I definitely would have to shift the context of how I talk about it now, because, and it was showing up when I would talk about it in college classes, like what I was working on. People were like, this sounds like rape culture. And I was like, oh yeah. Like, yes, but like, I felt like it's the other thing that was more interesting to me. Not that things are interesting and not like rape is not interesting, but was really sitting and witnessing that vulnerability, because I just never seen anything like that. Like, men are just sort of presented to me as strong, And like very subconsciously, I just sort of absorbed that men choose whether or not I get to be there. And now I can say no. Like I actually get to choose everything about my life and whether or not I want to spend my time with you and whatever.
Well, and that's funny because as from a guy's perspective, I always thought it was the opposite. I always thought women had all the power. That they got.
Yeah, and I guess, and I also realize as an Asian woman, it's like, wait a second, like I'm like the hottest fucking thing in town, even at my worst, even as sort of like what they would call a C grade Asian or whatever. These men in these workshops would refer to me. You know, I think I'm A plus. And every Asian woman's A plus BTW, but like, you know, like even at my worst, there's some nasty white dude that'll want this. Not that I want them back, but you know, like I was just like, why am I being so fucking desperate? So I made a rap album in Uganda. Like I don't need a date. I go to northern Uganda, everybody. I'll hook you up with the music producer. You'll feel great. You come back gangbusters. Collect tons of free food. Be unmarried at 42.
Well, do you have any, do you have any advice? It could be related to what we're talking about or other for my son that you think would be useful for him in the future?
Don't take those workshops. I mean, like find other ways to develop yourself as a human being. I think, I mean, you can take those workshops, take an improv acting class and stuff. Just like, at the point that I don't know. I think it's also okay to sit in the loneliness and try to understand other ways to find community or find validation that doesn't rely. And even the pickup artists say that for them, the pickup chicks and have lots of sex thing is more their marketing, because a lot of them will say, well, we actually are doing is we're life coaches. And the men who come to us think what they want is to have sex all the time and have their pick of women. But really what we're teaching them how to do is to embrace an inner confidence. That's what they tell me when I'm like, wait. but I think you could do that in different ways, whether it's hobbies you pick up or relationships, non-sexual relationships you have. But really, like, you have to be willing, you have to look at yourself and say, would I marry me? And would I be willing to look in the mirror and make a commitment to myself first before you bring yourself around? And I married myself as a woman, and whatever gender you are, you should be willing to do that before you throw yourself around.
I think that's amazing advice. And I'd like to put in, one of the things for people, I mean, they found recently that one of the best ways for people to get over depression, or not over depression, but, to deal with depression is actually to get outside yourself and start helping other people. To volunteer, to do things for other people is one of the best ways. So, if someone is feeling like, like the world is against them, I think a really good thing is to try to, like for example, me and my son, who's right next to me, we pick up trash on Sundays. We walk around the street and we pick up trash because I want us to think about not just us, but people outside of us. And I think it helps, whether it helps consciously or subconsciously, I think it's good to help other people.
I think as I run this Auntie Sewing Squad, I'm really wowed by, I see two things. I see a few people who still complain about being bored during quarantine. I'm like, how can you be bored? Or how can you just be clutching your pearls 2 months into this? And we're all donating our time. And like, I have people who drive all the way from South Bay or San Diego sometimes to just pick up fabric so they can sew masks, because it gives us a sense of purpose and something to do. And I feel like that's what this time, we have this moment right now where, you can't pick up anyone in a bar. It's really, you can't even find the most desperate of people willing to come out for a booty call. So we're left with like, this reckoning for us. Like, what, at the end of the world, who are you really, and what will you act on? And for me, I've never been so generous in my life. I keep saying next pandemic, I'm going to just watch Netflix, and you're all on. I mean, that's really where to locate in times of crisis, to locate who you really have the potential to be. Like, that's that moment. Yeah.
But I think, just what you're saying though, is once you're at that point where you're giving of yourself and you're more confident and believe in yourself more, I think it naturally attracts the kind of people in your life. I think that, or because you're more confident about yourself, you like yourself more, you're not desperately trying to like hook up with somebody at a bar, right?
I have to look at like, if I'm this desperate, do I want to hook up with someone else who's this desperate?
Like, it just makes it awkward, I think.
Now, so yeah, I mean, I think what I didn't finish was my point about like what is so weird. I haven't looked into what the pickup artists are doing now during quarantine. I don't know if they're teaching like how to snake some tail, really out, how to snake clean unvirused tail. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to consider. We don't have human interaction, and we're really having to pause and think about our lives.
Well, and I think that's why depression is a lot higher now, right? Over the last quarantine and stuff, because now we're just by ourselves. So,
Yeah.
Well, how can people follow you? How can people get to know what you're doing?
Well, I'm my name starts with a K, Kristina Wong on .com, and then I'm Ms. Kristina, MS Kristina, like MS13, MS Kristina, Instagram and Twitter. And you can follow my newest project, was the Auntie Sewing Squad. And hopefully I'll get back to touring my show, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen for about 2 years. Kristina Wong for public office, about my recent run and win in public office.
And I'll put all that in our show notes. So if anybody's listening, if they want to follow Kristina, go ahead and click on those notes. Thank you, Kristina, so much for your insight into the pickup culture and the advice around that. And for everybody else, please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast, or my podcast, Guy Code. And please, if you want to be on the show, if you have advice you want to give my son, I'd love to hear it. So hit us up at Guy Code Pod on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you, Kristina, again, and thank you everyone for listening.